Black professionals at Vodafone. Before we kick off and before I introduce Dari and Dayo today, hopefully you can see the screen in front of me. If I could ask you to all go to www.menti.com and enter the code on the screen, so that's 7571323. If you could just begin to answer the first question for me on there, that would be wonderful. We're going to be using some of these results today, so if you could go and do that now, that would be brilliant. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Kaammini. I am the UK Diversity and Inclusion Manager here at Vodafone, and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting this event today. You are going to be hearing from Dari and Dayo, who I will let introduce themselves, and there will also be an opportunity for questions at the end in the last 15 minutes. So if I could ask you all to take a few minutes to just think of a few questions and pop them in the question chat, that would be great, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dari first and then to Dayo, and we are going to get some introductions. So welcome both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Dari, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Dari Smith. I am a sector lead for the customer account security managers, whom we work in the Vodafone Business Security Enhanced area. I've been with the organisation for 16 and a half years now, and I'm enjoying myself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dari. And Dayo?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dayo Oni. I've been with Vodafone for just over 6 years. I've moved around a bit within Vodafone. So I was in Vodafone Group. I went into Vodafone Business, and I'm with the Vodafone UK Consumer. I'm a IT portfolio technical delivery manager, and that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And it would be interesting to hear from both of you what your actual jobs entail, because it sounds very interesting and very complex and something way beyond my understanding, but we'll get to that shortly. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to go into the Menti, and we've had a few responses, which is absolutely great. I'm just going to share those with you now. So many of you would have seen that we had asked a question on one or two words that describe your current perception of Vodafone as an employer. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer this. I see some really, really good answers on there. It's really great to see inclusive and diverse. It's definitely something that we're striving to be. And as an organisation, inclusion for all is one of the key pillars of our business purpose. So really positive to see that on there. But also lovely to see words like fun and customer, because we're very much a customer-driven organisation. So I'll stop sharing that now. But thank you so much for taking the time to do that. And we'll also be using Menti a little bit later on in the event today. So I'm going to ask Dayo and Dari a few questions today. And as I said, please do enter in your own as well. But the key thing that I wanted to kick off with was today's event is all about Black professionals at Vodafone. And just from both of your perspectives, I'm really keen to understand what your experience has been like being a Black professional at Vodafone. So Dari, if we'll start with you, what has that been like for you?
Let's have a think. As a Black professional, I've had some good experiences working at Vodafone. So I have been able to meet teams from all over the world. I have done about 6 different roles whilst I've been in the organisation. I have gone out and built teams in India, Romania, and the UK, and really sort of, draw teams together and work well with those teams. My colour or my colour, you don't notice that until you actually meet me. And by then you've already worked with me a time. So it hasn't really been an issue for me in recent years. In previous years, you might have had quick questions of, questions about my qualifications or as a woman, some of the things, they may ask me more questions and grill me because I did work in a technical organisation, so they'll ask you a bit more questions. But it's been, on the whole, it's been really good. It's been enjoyable and educational for me as well. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dari. And it's interesting to hear how things have changed over time as well. And I think hopefully we continue to see a more positive trajectory for ethnically underrepresented groups, not just across our business, but across society as well. So thank you for that. Dayo, how about for yourself? What has it been like being a Black professional at Vodafone?
I think overall working at Vodafone has been great for me. Like I said, I've been with the company for over 6 years now, and my personal experience so far as a Black professional has been progressive and inclusive to a large extent. I think Vodafone as a company itself, there's a real, and this is just a honest feedback, there's a real focus on diversity and inclusion, and that's something that's really important to me as someone from a minority background. To feel valued as part of the team and encouraged to be myself and at my best. My observations over the 6 years so far is that it doesn't really matter, who you are, where you're from, or what you look like. You get an opportunity or a chance to grow and progress. So overall, it's been great. Yes, it's been great. It's not a perfect business in any form, but it's a progressive business for me, and constantly looking for a way to be innovative about being more inclusive and ethical, and obviously profitable. So overall, good experience.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Dayo, because I think for me, one of the key things is that we're moving in the right direction. We are really putting this at the forefront of what we're trying to achieve. And yes, absolutely not a perfect business. And I think if we were a perfect business, that would almost be impossible, right? There's always more that you can do to be a more inclusive organization. And I really hope that that's where we are prioritizing going forward. Lovely. And Dari, you mentioned specifically that intersection of being a woman and being a Black woman. And I'm interested in the subject around intersectionality. It's something I'm very passionate about. And for those of you who haven't heard the term, intersectionality is really the study of intersections between forms or systems of oppression, domination, and discrimination. So what that means in plain English is basically how different characteristics can intersect and how that can therefore change somebody's experience. So, for example, I'll give myself as an example. I'm a woman, but I'm also an ethnic minority woman. And so therefore my experience, not just within the workplace, but within society is different from, say, a white woman or a woman with a disability. So I think those things are really important to recognize. So I guess for me, Dari, what I'm interested in is a little bit more around that. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience of being a Black woman at Vodafone? I think that would be really interesting for the audience to hear today.
I would say in the early days of joining the organisation, and this is probably prior to Vodafone because I haven't really experienced it once I started working in Vodafone. Now I joined what was then Cable and Wireless in 2005, which was then bought out by Vodafone in 2012. And in the early days, you'd walk into a meeting room and you'd do your presentation and you'd be grilled, for want of a better word, a lot more than your male colleagues would be grilled on your subject matter. Nowadays, that doesn't happen very often with me, mainly because I think I've been with the organisation for such a long time now that I'm known as a subject matter expert within my field. But in the early days, I would say it would happen, and it's less so now. But I have my name is an interesting one because you're never sure whether it's a woman or a man you're going to meet. And I've had, you've walked into a room with colleagues, with one of my colleagues, and they'll turn to my colleagues assuming they're me. So they've got my name on my job title, they'll walk in, they'll assume it's me, and then there'll be an embarrassed slight moment when they realise actually it is a woman who's going to be chairing the meeting. So, I've had those moments. They don't happen very much, they don't happen very often now. And intersectionality, that happens in all sort of walks of life and inside and outside of work, but within the organisation, that doesn't happen to me very often. I'm aware it might happen to some of my colleagues, but definitely not now. And I think it's because of the experience and they tend to know who I am now and what I do.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, because I think unconscious bias is still something that as a society we still need to continue to educate ourselves on and be really aware of. And look, at the end of the day, we all have unconscious bias. That's why it's called unconscious. And I think it's about raising awareness to that and learning from those experiences. So you're absolutely spot on. And actually, interestingly, one of the things that Vodafone has done recently is launch a program, a global training called the Withstander program. And whilst that does talk about unconscious bias quite a lot, it also focuses on other areas such as bystander intervention, so how to call out negative and inappropriate behaviors if you witness them, and actually active allyship as well. So hopefully in those situations, when they do happen, there is a more conscious response to nip that in the bud as soon as possible, and then to learn and educate yourselves on those experiences going forward. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. And really interesting, because before this event, we were having a long conversation about imposter syndrome. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on imposter syndrome as well, because so for those of you who are not familiar with this concept, and I imagine most of you will be today, imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud, which is something that people all experience in various different ways. But we know that amongst women and amongst ethnically underrepresented communities, particularly the Black community, we see higher rates of imposter syndrome. So I'm going to go to Dayo first on this one. Have you ever been impacted by imposter syndrome?
Simple answer, yes. So when I joined Vodafone, I felt that I had to blend in. I felt I had to soften myself to be understood and accepted. I'm not, just kind of thinking back now, I'm not 100% sure why, but maybe just the sheer size of the organization, maybe that was a factor in it. But I did, I struggled, and sometimes still struggle with the feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence, despite my experience and accomplishments. So what I've had to do is to deal. I've also had to deal with that complexity of, getting into a meeting room or even a virtual calls where you don't feel represented. And I then put myself under pressure to prove my competence in such environments. So one things that I've had to do personally to overcome that is just knowing myself better and accepting who I am. So my heritage, my strengths, the areas I need to improve, and just accepting that and being proud of that. And one thing that has definitely helped as well is the line managers that I've worked with and the employee networks that I've worked with, getting feedback from them on how to manage this imposter syndrome. Because honestly, it could be hampering if it's not managed properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually on that subject, you talked a little bit to this point, but I'm interested to know if you've ever felt you had to adapt your behaviors in order to cope with this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, a few times, yes. And I think that's, for me, the adjustment of my behavior. So, for example, the way I speak, my accent, trying to tone it down, or just a few things around those kind of lines where you need to adjust it to make sure people understand you, speak slower, so that people can pick out what are my pronunciations and some of the words that I'm speaking. So, if, for example, it's a difficult conversation happening, I'll probably tend to speak fast and that might not be clear. So it's kind of making those adjustments, and someone asking you questions of, sorry, I'm not sure I understood what you said. I don't know your accent, this kind of thing. So you then start to adjust a bit. But it's me kind of accepting the fact that, yes, sometimes I need to make these adjustments to be able to communicate clearer. But sometimes it's just making it clear that this is me, this is who I am, this is how I speak. You have to also be on the other side, be patient and understand that I'm not going to speak as you are. I'm going to speak as myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a real insight. And Dari, same question for you. Have you ever been impacted by this imposter syndrome? What has that been like for you?
I smile because I thought about it. That was this morning about 8 o'clock when I thought, what am I doing? And I mentally take myself off to the side into the corner and remind myself of all of the things I've done throughout my career, and then walk myself mentally back into the room and then start again, just remind myself. Dayo mentioned speaking to his manager, and I would have to say that I have been very lucky with some of the, with the managers I've had. my current management and previous managers, where they've, you know, one of the ladies who was my manager, she actually took me aside and, you know, helped me to get over that imposter syndrome by making sure that I attended courses for things like advanced presentation, leadership courses. She took those soft skill type courses to help me with the confidence within myself to be able to, you know, talk to my colleagues and customers that I speak with on a daily basis. And, and again, you adapt your language and your conversation. And I am quite comfortable now with saying, before I might not have been 5, 6, 7 years ago, I might not have been comfortable with saying, I don't know this. Now I'm comfortable within myself to say, actually, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll go off and find it out and come back and tell you. So it's sort of that's, with time, it is there and it happens every day. Every day it'll come up and bite you. But, it's got coping mechanisms of how you deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you've had people along the way who've been there kind of supporting you. And it's
definitely.
It's absolutely not about kind of fixing you as an individual, but it's about giving you the right infrastructure to feel like you can thrive. And I think that's so important. So really good to hear that you've had that experience. I think for me, it also reminds me of this concept of micro behaviors, which I'm sure both of you are familiar with, but, behaviors that are almost like the smaller everyday behaviors that when they are given or received, you feel a certain way from them. So, I was telling you the example that I often have where people sometimes say to me, oh, you're actually really confident. And I think, well, why are we asking about the actually? Why is that in there? And it's a bit like a backhanded compliment. And then that knocks my imposter syndrome a little bit as well. And so it's really interesting. And one of the things that we've been trying to do more at Vodafone is educate people on those micro behaviors, what they can look like, and actually the impact that can have on an individual. So we run these sessions called Let's Talk About Race across our organization, and they're facilitated sessions where we address things like terminology and language around race. But equally, we talk about things like micro behaviors, privilege, gaslighting. And I think that education is really important to ensure that people are conscious of how this can impact an individual, and actually as ethnically underrepresented people within our business, how that might make us feel as well. So really interesting that both of you could have alluded to some of those things too. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm keen to move on to the next question. And actually, I'm gonna ask both of you this because Dayo, you talked a little bit about, there's almost, I want to call them mentors that you've had throughout your career. But I'm going to go to Dayo first on this one because one of the things that I think is really important is visible role models. And I want to ask you what you think the importance of a visible role model is to you, and how that has then impacted your career as a consequence. So Dayo, over to you.
Quite important. And my personal experience, Vodafone has a mentoring process, right? I think they still have it anyway, where you search for a mentor. I used that, and the first mentor that I picked there, I sat down with a mentor, and we had 1 or 2 sessions, and it became very clear quickly that it wasn't really going to work out. Just for some obvious reasons. And the second mentor I picked then was someone kind of from a similar background to me. And there was just that immediate connection. The mentor kind of understood where I was coming from with some of the questions I was asking and how to overcome some of the barriers. So honestly, it's been an immense value to me. And one of the key things that mentor has left with me, because the person's left the company now, is teaching me how to then focus on what I can control, because that was one of the things that I was keen to resolve. So things I can control with regards to my career, just believing more in myself and my own capabilities, either from their own personal experience, how they overcame some of those challenges, or their colleagues as well that overcame such similar challenges, and giving me life examples of how I can important. So honestly, very, very important.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, all of the very important things you learn from a mentor as well. And one of the things that, as we're having this conversation about Black professionals today, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, how relevant do you think it is to have somebody who looks like you as your mentor? Do you think that that's not relevant at all?
I think it's really important because, like I said, I mean, I did just want to go into the specifics. So the second mentor that I got was definitely from a minority background as well. So there was just it was easier to ask some questions without hesitation, and then to then look at the possibility that, because he was quite high up in the organization as well, to then look at that person and say, right, okay, if you can do it, then that means I can actually get there. So tell me your story, tell me your background. How did you get to this position? What things did you learn? What trainings did you go for? Who did you have as a mentor as well? How did you go from being a manager to a senior manager? What was your journey like? Tell me tell me things I can imbibe from your journey. So and that has really helped.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And one of the quotes that I absolutely love is, you can't be what you can't see. And I think it's so important. We all experience this from such a young age, where if we see, somebody on TV doing something that we're passionate about, then we think, yes, that's something that I can go into and do as well, because they look like me and they're doing it. And I don't think everyone necessarily understands or appreciates how important that actually is to us. So it's really interesting to hear how much of an impact that did actually have on you. So thank you for sharing that, Dayo. Dari, we have you back. I wanted to ask you a question on role models as well, if that's okay. So what do you think the importance of a visible role model is for you, and how has that impacted you within a workplace context?
I do think it's important. Unfortunately, in the area which I've worked in, there weren't very many women, full stop, regardless to black. It's a technical environment. And the role model I did have, she was actually my manager. So it was good that, I watched how she behaved, and her mannerisms, and tried to work out how I could map my own kind of way throughout that. I did have a mentor, which is another female, mentor, which is outside of my organisation. And so you could see that women were progressing in the organisation. They just weren't typically where I sat. And that was good for me as well. And so it is important to see that there are people who look like you in the positions that you want to aspire to. Unfortunately, at that time where I was looking at it, there weren't any, and that's just the way it is. But I could see that there was opportunities for women, full stop, to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is why something like this type of event is so important, because, it's really important to send the message to people that, you can do these roles. There are people who look like you who are doing these roles and working in these companies. And I think that sends a really strong message to hopefully those who are watching this webinar today as well, because both of you, I'm sure, are really prominent role models for those on the call. So thank you again for participating. One of the questions I wanted to ask as well was around the relationship with mentorship, but also how that's tied into sponsorship. Because one of the things that we know is ethnically underrepresented groups, particularly Black communities, again, tend to be over-mentored but under-sponsored. And again, for those who are not so familiar with that nuance of what the difference is, so a sponsor tends to actually advocate for your career. So tends to be somebody who is that person who advocates on your behalf if there are opportunities that come up and things like that. And just to ask both of you, not necessarily in an official term, but have you ever had that person who has really advocated on behalf of your career, and how important has that been for your career progression? So I'll go to Dayo first in this instance.
Well, no, I haven't had someone directly advocate for my career. It's something that I've sought from the mentor, for example, to say, right, that one of the reasons why I wanted to mentor me is, I really need more like an advocate for my career to, push me out and all these things.
Yeah.
And that part of it was what didn't go as smooth as I thought it will have been. So that's perhaps an area that I think some improvement could be done. I'm not sure I know what the answer is, but that's definitely an area that
we're not expecting you to know the answer. Don't worry. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, and it's kind of one of those next areas that as an organization we really need to look at, about how we're ensuring that we have those advocates at very senior levels, ensuring that it's a really strong diversity of people who are being advocated on behalf on. So yeah, absolutely. How about you, Dari?
I haven't had a sponsor, but from talking to you, I will be looking for one.
So maybe some advice to those who are out there today as well.
I've learned something, I've learned something new today, and I will be going off and looking at that.
Good to hear. And just on the subject of role models, while we're talking about it, do either of you have role models externally, people that you look up to in society that have really inspired you?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I think the importance of that, right, is always to kind of, the way I try to live my life is that there has to be a life outside of work and outside of the profession, just in terms of values and all that. So yeah. I have other role models there, who I reach out to just to help me grow in all ramifications of life. So they're personal ones. I'm not going to name them, but that there are personal role models, out there who. Yeah. It's just important. They've gone ahead of you, right? So they've got experience, and if they don't have the experience, they probably know someone that has gone through whatever you're going through, So because I'm a firm believer, there's really nothing new coming up. It's something similar has happened before. So you just need to get that person with the right experience to kind of talk you through how. You don't necessarily have to take on what they're saying all on board, but at least there's that advice to say that's an option for you to do. So yes, I do. I think it's important as well.
Brilliant. How about you, Dayo?
I'm going to say Condoleezza Rice. When I look at
Tell us more.
When I look at a Black woman who has gone out there and done it first, of a kind, and I'll look at her and I think, oh, I want to be like her when I grow up. And the way she articulates herself, and in her political career, conducted herself, that is someone I sort of look at and think, oh, that is the kind of person I look at outside.
Yeah. Absolutely.
When you bring it back down into like a personal level, there are some people in the organisation when I sit and listen to them talk. I've been on meetings and you hear them talk and how they conducted themselves. There are a few within the organisation that I look at as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's really good to hear. And when you mentioned Condoleezza Rice, it made me automatically think of Kamala Harris and that fantastic quote where she talks about what her mother always said to her, which was, if you're the first, make sure you're not the last, or something to that effect. And I think that's a really valuable one, because it's so important to, create these communities where we are supporting one another. And they don't obviously have to be based around things like race or gender, or any kind of underrepresented characteristic, but it's so important to ensure that we are seeing that diversity coming through. And I just absolutely adore that quote. Thank you both for sharing that. Slight change of tact in the questions that we're going to. So, Dayo, you mentioned to me earlier that you're a line manager. So I'm interested to hear what is it like being a line manager at Vodafone, and particularly what is it like being a line manager trying to kind of push the inclusion for all agenda at Vodafone as well?
I've been a line manager for quite a while now. So what is it like? It's just like you live and breathe it. You don't just manage your people. In some instances, the team that I work with, you lead them, you set the guidelines for them and the strategy for them, and they will work to that strategy. You take them along on a path with you about where we need to go and what we need to do.
Yeah.
And, you are there, you're there to help them achieve their goals as well. When I think about the inclusion and the diversity sort of strategy, I think if I do a lot of interviewing, and if I've come across someone who's we're interviewing them, and you think, actually, you've not put this on your CV that you have that skill, and through the interview, it comes out that they've got that skill. Sometimes I'll say, do you mind if I give you feedback after we've completed the interview? I say, you haven't put this on your CV, and you need to put that on your CV because you're quite clearly doing that. And one of those experiences is someone who's actually within the organisation now. When they were first interviewed, they didn't put a skill set that was required for the role on their CV. When we, through the interview and talking, and you're asking probing questions, and that did come out. they weren't,
Yeah.
so at the end of the interview, I said, you need to put that on your CV going forward. At the end of the interview,
Yeah.
obviously, in the process, they didn't get the role then. But when another role came up at that time and they were interviewed again, it was definitely on their CV and they did get the role. So, it's about helping people. And sometimes, I've had an intern where his CV didn't look very good. But when you started talking to him and asking him some of the things that he was doing at university, some of the projects that he was leading, he was actually quite good. So I, took him through that summer. He came to work with us. And at the end of the summer, I said, right, you need to get this and come back again next year. And I was so pleased that the young man came back again the following year and came in on the graduate scheme. And that was that's from not necessarily seeing a CV, but actually interacting with that person and asking questions and getting those, giving them the opportunity to talk about what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm hearing from you, Dario, is, as a line manager, you almost take that responsibility for someone's development. And even when you're not directly their line manager, it's sort of like, it's still a responsibility that you want to see that progression and that development in an individual. So what you can do to help them do that is really prominent. And I guess as a line manager, you have so much experience coming into that role. So there's so much that you can offer as a consequence. So I'm sure that's really beneficial to the people around you as well, which is interesting, given we were talking about mentoring earlier. Line managers can almost become like a bit of an unofficial mentor / sponsor for both of you in that regard, can't it?
Yep.
Yeah,
you can do, but when we're talking about the personal development, we're talking, the onus is to show your team how they can progress in the next role and ask them the questions. It's their personal development, and ask them the questions. Where is it you want to be, and give them pointers of where they can go for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not their parent that you can kind of manage them through that situation, but you can definitely ask them the right questions to ensure that they get there.
You ask them the questions they need to, where do you think you need to go to get there, or what do you think you need to do to get there? Yes,
absolutely right.
Sometimes put them in the right direction.
No, I can completely imagine. I'm just going to go on to one of our final questions, but before I do that, I just wanted to remind you all that if you do have any questions to ask, then click on the 3 lines on the recording and you can submit your questions there, and we'll try and address as many of them as possible when we have the time. So one of the things I'm really keen to ask both of you is around how you both get involved in Vodafone as kind of a wider community. So I guess the first thing which I think people will be interested to hear about is around our employee networks. So I know both of you are members, for want of a better term, of our Black Professionals Network. Dayo, can you start by telling me a little bit about what the network is, what it seeks to do, and how you get involved?
So yeah, you're right. I'm part of the Black Professionals Network, and when I joined Vodafone, I didn't even know this network existed. I think I got an invite after I'd been here about a year, before I even knew it existed. But what I found out, right, was by joining the network, there was a good approach in terms of helping everyone, or settle into Vodafone if you're new, first of all, trying to understand the culture of Vodafone and to build on that inclusion process, and also just a general support on in socials and networking events as well to help each other grow feel more comfortable with who we are, accepting who we are, and how we can progress within Vodafone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant. And how about you, Dayo? You're involved in the Black Professionals Network as well, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right, yeah, I'm involved with that, and it's more of a during the meetings with everyone, and we talk about issues that people may be questions they may ask. I may take it from a manager's point of view, and when we talk about how do I progress, and have you completed your personal development plan, and this is what you need to so. Happy to help out, and answer questions in that respect with everyone. And even myself, I may ask them questions about, what do you think about this as well. So it's inclusive, and we work together as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who are less familiar on the call with the concept of an employee network, you might have also heard the term ERG or business resource group. An employee network is basically a group of individuals who have it's kind of come from the grassroots from a Vodafone perspective, where certain groups have set up these communities to bring together people with a common or shared interest or identity. So at Vodafone, we have a number of different fantastic employee networks, Black Professionals Network being one of them. And they do a really brilliant job, as both of you mentioned, of really creating a sense of community, celebrating the community as well. And, we did a few fantastic things over Black History Month as well. And equally, holding the business to account. So we have lots of conversations and a very open dialogue with our employee networks about how we can improve as an organization. And I think for me, that's a really important aspect because within the diversity and inclusion team, we want to ensure that we have diverse voices being heard in these conversations. And by engaging with our networks, we really ensure that we do that. For everyone's benefit as well, we've got a number of different employee networks, and people are often members across both as well. So we have a Black Professionals Network, but we also have a Multicultural Inclusion Network, which does things like celebrate different religions and cultures and nationalities. We have a Women's Network, we have an LGBT plus Friends Network, a Parents and Carers Network, a Disability Network, which is called the Votability Network, an Armed Forces Network. I mean, I could probably go on and on and on, but there's such a thriving community of different individuals. And one of the things I wanted to ask both of you as well is, working in this virtual environment as we currently are, how has it been being part of a network in that virtual environment? And Dayo, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
How has it been? We still connect. We connect a couple of times a week, a couple of times a month and a week when we can do. And it's been good because we've used the tools we had to make sure we're still talking to each other. And throughout the pandemic, we have been talking to each other, and it's been quite good. I enjoy that. Unfortunately, we can't see each other face to face, but it's almost just as good as we meet up and have a chat at those meetings. So I don't think the pandemic's really hasn't stopped us from talking, from connecting at all, actually. And it's actually made it a little bit more structured, and we get to talk to each other.
I think that's brilliant. And anything to add on that front, Dayo?
No, it's similar, same. So I think one event that comes to mind, right, is if you think about the George Floyd incident, when all that happened, there was a huge outcry then, and the Black Professional Network that was really there because there were lots of forums lots of discussions happening, how people were feeling, how people were taking all that, and how to kind of get through all that emotions, right? And there was also, I think, a session with the CEO at that time, just discussing open discussion, like you said, accountability. How do we discuss this within the company in an open manner? And I think Black Professional Network was definitely part of that. All the other communities as well was part of that. So really, really useful community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a really good point there, which is, multiple communities being involved as well. I think the networks do a phenomenal job of collaborating and actually being, again, using that word, intersectional in their approach. And I think that's really phenomenal because people are not just one thing, and it's so important to recognize that, people are allies to different communities, but equally they might align with more than one different characteristics. So I think it's super important that that's the case. And I adore our employee networks. I think they're really the bread and butter of our inclusion agenda at Vodafone as well. I'm going to go on to questions from the crowd first, but I want to ask you both a little bit more about your jobs, because one of the things that we discussed before the event was what does your job actually mean? Because for somebody like me who works within the HR space, it's a completely different world. And I think there'll be lots of people watching this call today who are from a variety of different industries and backgrounds. And I'm going to head over to you first, Dayo, just to understand, what does your role actually entail? And if you could tell us a little bit more about the roles within that space as well, and what kind of exists within your world.
So like I said, I'm an IT portfolio delivery manager. What that means, right, is for all within consumer, for all the consumer products that you see. So if you take, for example, when we rolled out 5G, right, there has to be the background IT changes that need to happen. So my team is responsible, right, for managing all that IT changes that needs to happen, and then to give the consumer the network. So if you take, for example, the Vodafone Vodafone Pro broadband that we just launched as well, I think in March or April, that's another product that we worked on in my team within IT to launch it for the consumer. So it's all doing all the back-end IT changes to make sure that the customer experience that our customers get are all kind of flow easily, and our NPS scores can improve. So that's basically what we do. There are diverse roles within that. So I'm a portfolio manager, but I've got project managers working with me. I've got PMO resources working with me. I've got developers. I've got testers working. So it's a diverse team of professionals coming together to be able to deliver this consumer products.
Okay, fantastic. I mean, I could probably ask you more and more about that, but I'll hand over to Dayo for now to tell us a little bit more about your role.
Okay, I'm a sector lead and I manage customer account security managers. And this team deals with some of our large and corporate customers and covering all sectors. And they deal with ensuring that we as an organization meet our security obligations to our customers. So they can be involved in any kind of security question, from issues with a security incident or questions on a project that's coming up, and are we meeting our security obligations by implementing a new service to this customer? And they're involved with the customer, daily, and they have a chat. They speak to the customers daily, so it's in daily interactions with that. And I manage that team of people who you interact with those customers. So anything security, with the customer can pretend, that they are the first point of contact. They will come into the team.
Fantastic. I mean, I certainly understand both of your roles a lot better now. They sound fascinating. They're such an instrumental part of, really what we deliver on at Vodafone. And just for people's benefit who are watching today, who are thinking, what kind of jobs are there for me at Vodafone? I mean, there really is a variety. And I would suggest all of you take a look at our careers websites. Hopefully you can see on the screen in front of you, I've got some details on there about our Instagram accounts, our Facebook accounts, our LinkedIn, and also our Twitter. And do head over to our careers website, which is www.careers.vodafone.co.uk to check out a little bit more around our diversity and inclusion initiatives, but certainly around all of the jobs that we have available. It won't surprise you to know that we have significant amount of roles within areas such as technology, as a tech comms company, but also variety of areas such as consumer and business, working with customer services and operations, retail, but equally corporate functions like finance, HR, legal, etc. So there's a real variety there. I certainly think there is something for everyone up there. So do check out what's on the screen in front of you as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight. Just to actually continue talking about your roles a little bit more, what's the best part of your job? Dayo, I'm going to go to you again first.
To be honest, I think it's the satisfaction of, when we roll out consumer products, right? When you see the advert on TV and you kind of hear the sales, or you get the sales figures of how consumers are feeding back on some of these products, I think that's the satisfaction. Sometimes, to be honest, it gets a bit tedious. It gets a bit hectic, trying to meet deadlines to get these products into the market. But when you hear the satisfaction from our customers saying, yes, I'm pleased with this product, or the customer experience as well, to say, oh, Vodafone went over and beyond to meet my needs, I think that brings satisfaction to me. So we're not just twiddling our thumbs to deliver something, but we're actually delivering products that are impacting customers. That's the best part of the job for me.
Yeah, I love that. And that's definitely aligns to our spirit of Vodafone, which hopefully a lot of you are familiar with from our website. But, earning customer loyalty is a big part of what we are driven as an organization and the behaviors that we encourage. So it's really great to see that come out for you, Dayo. Dari, what about for you? What's the best part about your job?
I think it's that as well, as when the customer feedback, when we've done a good job, or there may have been an issue and we've resolved it for them. They've come back and said thank you, and it is that kind of customer satisfaction that we get from there. Another part of it is when, I see my team are all happy, and that everybody's working together towards the common goal. But definitely, I would have to err on the side. It's more tip the scale. It's more, I'm happy when the customers are definitely happy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just one thing to add to that. Another aspect of it is beating the competitors to market. That gives me so much joy when we launch a product before our competitors.
When we get there first.
When we get there first. And we not just get there first, we get there first and we set a standard so high that they're struggling to follow. Satisfaction. Priceless.
There is nothing wrong with a healthy bit of competition, is there? Fantastic. Thank you both so much. The next question, I think, is probably one that I will answer, but I'll come to you to both hear your opinions as well. We talked a little bit about role models, and I know that when we look at we reflect inwards, we can definitely do better when it comes to diversity in the most senior ranks of our organization. So somebody's asking, what are the tangible actions that we're actually putting in place to ensure there's representation at all levels in our organization? Now, I can certainly talk about some of the things that we're doing, but before I do, is there anything that either of you would like to weigh in on this?
We're going to leave this one for you to answer.
The difficult questions are left, and I think that's completely fair enough. And look, I think it's definitely something that as an organization we recognize. And to say that watch this space is very vague, but there's definitely lots of moving parts at the moment where we're really cognizant of that, and we need to ensure that we have representation at every single level of our organization. I think there's a combination of different activities, and as I say, with diversity and inclusion, there is never a one-size-fits-all situation, and there's never a silver bullet either. So we can't just do one thing and hope that that's going to have a huge impact. We signed up to the Race at Work Charter back in January of 2020. And this was really to provide better outcomes for Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues across our organisation. And there are 5 key principles of the Race at Work Charter, which include things like appointing an executive sponsor for race, of which we have both a UK and a global executive sponsor, really driving that agenda at the very top of our organisation. Another one is around capturing and reporting of data, which we are aggressively trying to do from an internal perspective, because, again, what gets measured gets managed. And when we have that infrastructure in place to understand where the gaps are in our organization, we can really focus our attention and energy at filling those gaps. So that's something we're absolutely focusing on at the moment. Another point is making sure that we have a zero tolerance approach to bullying and harassment. It won't surprise all of you to know that as an organization, if our surprise, that is our approach. It is a zero tolerance approach. But as I mentioned earlier, we're very conscious of the fact that those microaggressions and behaviors will always exist in our society, and we need to do better to call those out and make sure people are aware of them. Hence our Withstander program, and Let's Talk About Race program. The next point is making sure this is the responsibility of all leaders and managers. Our leadership teams are all going through race fluency training, and we have a very strong action plan to ensure that there is tangible accountability for each and every one of them. We have what we call our REACH action plan. REACH stands for race, ethnicity, and cultural heritage, because we know that all of those various factors interact and intersect. So we need to address them together. And so looking at things like inclusive leadership is definitely something that is a big focus of ours. And then finally, the last point is around ethnic minority career progression. And we participate in a few external programs like Business in the Community's cross-organizational mentoring program. We do have our own mentoring within Vodafone as well. But again, as I mentioned earlier, this is really about fixing what we think is wrong within our systems rather than fixing individuals. So it's not about just handing everyone a mentor and hoping that resolves the problem. It's about really creating an ecosystem where everyone can thrive. So whilst that's a very whistle-stop response, we will actually be putting out some information about this very soon to evidence what we're doing and what our action plan is. But do head to our website as well, because there's already some information out there, which I'd love to talk to you more about today, but I'm just conscious of time, that will hopefully give you that information. So hopefully that answers your question. But do check out our website for more information on that, and do keep an eye out over the next few weeks as well. In terms of the next questions that we've got, what other initiatives are Vodafone doing or trying to help improve diversity within their workforce? Again, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to ask both of you, is there anything that you're particularly passionate about that we do from a diversity and inclusion perspective that stands out for either of you? Dayo, I'll come to you first.
Thanks. It's definitely our networks and the interaction between the networks and the management that I can see, we're trying to listen to what's going on for people, for the ethnic minorities and stuff. So it's definitely the networks we've got within the organisation and how they interact with the businesses as usual as well. So it's definitely that.
Brilliant. What about you, Dayo?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've seen that's different from other organizations that I've worked in, right, is having an exec sponsor. For the.
Can you tell us what that is, Dayo, just so for people who don't know what that is?
So having like the senior directors, leading, as sponsors for some of the networks, not for some, for all the networks. So they are visibly leading, sending out emails in terms of this is what we're doing. Yeah. This is, attending some of the networking events as well and some of the seminars. And so you can ask them questions directly and they can then champion it, when they sit down in the senior leadership team, to state things that needs to happen. I think that is, to me, that is progress, because you have an exec sponsor. So there's kind of a top-down, bottom-up approach to managing business. But like you said, there's no silver bullet to it. It's still work in progress. But when you have that at a leadership level, someone advocating for these things to become more embedded in the organization, I think that's a good step.
Brilliant. I think it's a really good point, and I love that it's driven by absolutely everyone across our business. So one of the things that we're really passionate about is, as I mentioned at the beginning, inclusion for all is one of the key pillars of our business purpose. So everybody across our organization has a responsibility for this agenda. And I have the pleasure of delivering our onboarding training to new starters. And one of the things I always say to them is, the thing that we need you all to think about is, what is your role? What can you do to help drive this agenda as well? And that goes for everybody, including our very senior leaders, to ensure that they are really having an influence on this agenda too. So thank you for that. Just from my perspective, again, do check out our website because there's so much more information on there. But we have programs across the board when we talk about diversity. So it's not just one area that we focus on, and it's actually not just different areas that we focus on individually. It's all about underpinning that with inclusivity and making sure that people feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. That for us is really the important piece behind it. Somebody's also asked the question, what next for Vodafone? Gosh, there is still so much to do. So I think, and I think from today's call in itself, one of the things that we've obviously discussed is sponsorship being a really prominent one. Is there anything that, either of you would like to see Vodafone doing next? I'll come to you first on this one, Dayo.
I think it's the speed at which this kind of changes need to happen, right? So there's always the good talk of, we're doing this, we're doing a lot of things, but maybe trying to improve on the speed at which we put some of these things in place so that we can start getting a bit more traction. Where I do agree, a lot has been done. Perhaps we just need to be quicker about it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. What about you, Dari? Any thoughts? Or is Dari frozen by the looks of it? All right, we'll give Dari a second to come back there. There was bound to be some sort of technical issue at some point today. Somebody's asked the question, the journey of diversity keeps evolving. So from our years of experience, how would you say Vodafone is doing? Dayo, what's your perspective? How do you think Vodafone is doing within this space? And please be honest.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a progressive approach, right? So when I joined 6 years ago, like I said, I don't think there was much. Maybe there was, and I wasn't aware of it, but I don't think there was a huge traction or progress in terms of diversity and inclusion. But over the last 3-4 years, I think that's really getting more and more traction now. So I think each year, like I said, with the exec sponsors, you get more people determined to make a change, and it's not just like it's all bottom up and top down. Everybody's trying to chip in to see how best we can make this change and make people more inclusive in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely right. Dari, I don't know if you had heard the question that we asked of Dayo there. I was just to ask, how do you think Vodafone is doing from a diversity and inclusion perspective from your experience? And again, please be honest here. Basically ask you to evaluate my job right now.
you know, I've been around for a very long time. And when I joined, and I'm going to talk about when seeing young Black women in the organisation, or Black women in the organisation, when I joined, there weren't many. Now I'm so happy to see that there are a lot more young ladies and older, you know, women joining the organisation from the graduates back down, and I like to see that they're coming in. We can always do more, you know. We can always do more to encourage women, and I'm going to say women and Black women, to join the organisation. But I am so, you know, I'm sort of enthused to see that there are a lot more now than they were, and in joining within tech as well, that there are a lot more women joining. You know, there are a lot more women and Black women joining that in the tech as well.
Brilliant. And I think it's absolutely right. You know, if as an organization, we should constantly be striving to do better. And I think the last thing that we would ever want is to pat ourselves on the back and say, job done. Yeah. We absolutely need to then, you know, if we feel like we've reached a certain milestone, we need to be looking at what's next, because when it comes to diversity, it really intersects with culture, and that's always constantly evolving. And we need to make sure that we are really creating one where everyone feels included. So on that note, we're very close to running out of time, but I'm going to ask just one more question from both of you. And I'm also going to ask for your reflections as well on today. Before I do that, though, I'm just going to share the final Menti. So please do let me know when you can all see that. I say, let me know when you can see that. Dari, hopefully you can see that in front of you. But I'm going to go to Dari first on this one. So the question is, how would you describe the culture of Vodafone? And the last thing I just would love you to do is any advice that you have for those watching today who are thinking of applying for a job at Vodafone. So over to you, Dari.
How would I describe the culture? I think it's inclusive. It's the culture where you can learn, learn and grow. There's so many different roles within the organisation that you can apply for. And I would say my last thing is apply for them. But yeah, there's so many different, you know, roads you can go down, whether it's technology, HR, whatever. There's so many different things that you can do within this organisation. And, you know, if you fancy to do something slightly different, you know, you might come in and you come in HR and you think, actually, I want to have a go of it in tech. Well, there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah.
You know, and the only thing that is going to hinder your moving to that thing, moving across or trying something different, would be yourself. But yeah, I'd encourage anyone who's thinking about, you know, applying for a role, apply for the role. You know, have a go, and and there's so many different roles you can do within the organisation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dari. And Dayo, how about yourself? How would you describe the culture, and what advice would you give for anyone thinking of applying for a role here?
I think as a company, I agree with Dari. It's definitely progressive. I'll add innovative as well, and definitely inclusive. I think I see the company more as it has the mentality of a startup, but the heritage of how old are we now? 40-year-old business. You know, so it's definitely a progressive company to join and work with. Applying for roles, what's stopping you? I suppose that's the question. What's stopping anyone? If there are roles there. Think about it. That there is the support that you need. You know, it's not perfect, but there's work being done every day to improve it. So there's nothing stopping anyone from applying. If you want to add
yeah. What a fine note to end on. What's stopping you? I absolutely adore that. And I think that's really, really fantastic. I just want to end with finally sharing the Menti screen to show people, you know, the final outcomes for the event today. But look, I just want to thank you all so much. Dari, Dayo, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. So bear with me while I just share the final output from today. So we've got progressive, inclusive, on a journey. I think that really summarizes us well as an organization. And I just thank you all for coming today. I thank you all for taking the time to attend. And if you've got any further questions, do take a look at our social media pages. Contact us on there. You can direct message us. And there's more information about how to get in touch on our careers website. So once again, thank you, Dayo. Thank you,
Thank
Dari.
you. It's a pleasure.
And thank you all for joining. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.